In the Philippines, where divorce is not an option, ending a marriage has always been an unbelievably tough road. But in 2021, a single Supreme Court case completely changed the landscape for one of the most common grounds for annulment. We're talking about Andal versus Andal, a landmark case that totally redefined what it means to be psychologically incapacitated for marriage.
And these words, right from the decision itself, really set the tone for this huge shift. The Supreme Court was basically saying, look, relationships are complicated and messy. It's time for the law to catch up with reality. They were signaling a move away from a very rigid, almost cold interpretation of the law to something way more humane. Now, to really get why this case is such a big deal, you first have to understand what people were up against before. For decades, getting an annulment for psychological incapacity felt like trying to escape a legal straitjacket. The hurdles were incredibly high and for many just impossible to clear. Okay, so the whole idea comes from Article 36 of the Family Code. On paper, it sounds pretty reasonable, right? If someone is truly unable, not just unwilling, but unable to fulfill your basic marriage duties, the marriage can be declared void. But in practice, the courts had piled on so many extra rules that it became anything but simple. And this is that straitjacket I was talking about. It was called the Molina Doctrine. To get an annulment, you literally had to prove your spouse had a diagnosed mental illness, that it was serious, permanent, and get this, that it existed at the exact moment you two got married. You had to bring in a psychiatrist to testify to all of this. It was a ridiculously tough standard to meet. So, with these super strict rules in the background, let's turn to the story of Rosanna Tan Andal and Mario Andal. Their marriage and its breakdown would be the case that finally challenged this entire legal framework. They had a bit of a whirlwind romance in 1995, but as you can see, things unraveled fast. Almost right away, the marriage was plagued by Mario's escalating drug problems, his bizarre behavior, and some really scary situations that put both Rosanna and their little girl at risk. It got so bad that just a few years in, they had to separate. So Rosanna's argument in court wasn't just that Mario was making bad choices. She argued that all these things, the drug use, stealing from their business to pay for it, the paranoia, his total failure to show up as a husband or a father, were all symptoms of a much deeper problem, that he was fundamentally incapable of being the partner he promised to be. So how did this very personal and painful story turn into a legal fight that would make its way to the highest court in the land? Well, that journey started in the trial courts. The case basically ping-ponged through the system. At first, the trial court agreed with Rosanna and granted the annulment. But then, the Court of Appeals stepped in and slammed the door shut. They reversed the decision, sticking strictly to those old Molina rules. They said the expert testimony didn't count because the doctor hadn't personally examined Mario, which, by the way, is a huge roadblock in these cases. And that set the stage for the Supreme Court to finally step in, not just for Rosanna and Mario, but to take a hard look at the Molina Doctrine itself. And this is where everything changes. The Supreme Court saw this as more than just one marriage. It was a chance to fundamentally rewrite the rules for everyone. This chart just lays it out so clearly. The court basically shifted the entire conversation. Psychological incapacity went from being a medical problem to a legal one. It was no longer about proving your spouse had some specific diagnosis from a medical textbook. Instead, the focus moved to their actions and whether those actions showed a true inability to live up to their marital promises. So the main takeaway here is huge. Courts no longer have to label someone with a mental illness. The new ruling says, look, a person's personality and behavior can make it impossible for them to be a spouse, and you don't need a doctor's official diagnosis to prove that. The proof is in their behavior. And this was another game changer. Proof no longer has to come from a single psychiatrist. Now, judges can look at the totality of evidence. That means they can build the whole picture using testimony from friends, family, coworkers. The people who actually saw what was happening day in and day out. Okay, so to make sure this new, more flexible approach isn't just a free-for-all, the court also raised the bar for evidence. You now have to prove your case with clear and convincing evidence. The best way to think about it is as a middle ground. It's more than just showing your side is slightly more likely to be true, but it's not as extreme as the beyond a reasonable doubt standard you'd see in a criminal trial. It's all about balancing compassion with protecting the institution of marriage. So, after all that legal back and forth, what does this actually mean for people in the Philippines? What's the real impact of the Andal ruling? Honestly, the impact is massive. First, it humanizes the law.
It says you don't have to shame or diagnose someone to admit a marriage is broken beyond repair. It also protects marriage by allowing a way out for unions that were fundamentally flawed from day one. It empowers judges to look at real life, not just a checklist, and it lifts a huge financial and emotional weight off of people who are already going through a terrible time.
In the end, the Tan Andal case leaves us with this really profound question. It's a powerful reminder that law isn't static. It has to evolve with our understanding of people. This case didn't just end one broken marriage. It really did carve out a more compassionate and realistic path forward for so many others.